Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session 4.2, where we are going to talk about the shift from retrieval to resolution and why Agentic RAG matters now. I'm excited to introduce our speakers who bring incredible knowledge and experience to this conversation. We have Girish Ahankari, EVP of Engineering, and Cobus Greyling, AI Evangelist here at Kore.ai. The session isn't about the next evolution in search technology, but fundamentally changing how enterprises turn information into action. We are seeing remarkable momentum as organizations move beyond static information retrieval to dynamic, reasoning capable systems that don't just find answers but orchestrate entire business process around those answers. Without further ado, let's dive into our first question. Girish and Kobus. Why do you think AI agents as a term is in decline while agentic workflows are on the increase in terms of use?
So, Cobus, I just wanted to start from myself. So, I mean, I wouldn't say AI agents as such is declining, but then agentic workflow is picking up a lot. Uh, that is because of the reality that what the term that we call here is orchestrated intelligence, where not, I mean, while everyone wants things to be autonomous, enterprises have to be bound against the governance rules which are applied on each of these enterprises, the policies that are to be followed, the guardrails that need to be implied. So and there are a lot of business processes that are already set in. So what is required is more of a orchestrated intelligence wherein use autonomous we give autonomy for smaller use cases, but wherever there are use cases which are a bit complex in nature, where business rules need to be applied, proper guardrails need to be applied, conditional, every enterprise has some conditional capabilities which they offer to their customers or employees. In such cases, agentic workflows is the right solution, which creates a balance between autonomous and orchestrated intelligence. So I think that's how I would position it. Sorry, Kobus, over to you.
Yeah, no worries. I think Girish really covered it very well, Akhil. And when Girish mentioned about policies and corporate governance, I was listening these days to a podcast, and someone said they spoke to a CEO, and he said all the talk of AI agents being fully autonomous scares him because no one in his organization is fully autonomous, not even him. There are, like Girish mentioned, guardrails and policies and that needs to be adhered to. And so I really appreciate what Girish said about the orchestrated intelligence and fitting into the enterprise.
Yeah, so another term I would call it, it's an agency, but it's a safe agency. So you want to be safe while you are giving autonomous capabilities.
Yes, that's actually an interesting perspective on how workflows provide balance between autonomy and governance. Now, when we think about how these agentic workflows operate effectively, there's clearly still a need to understand what users actually want to accomplish. So, gentlemen, this brings me to my next question about user intent. User intent is still important, right? So many studies talk about intent in different ways. Just wanted to understand your perspectives on it.
Yeah, so I mean, I have seen the journey of conversational AI from the traditional NLP era to the agentic era. So the term intent was typically used for classifying, given a user input, whenever a user comes in, to classify which intent on the predefined intents that you have, which we call as classes, should I choose from. In that era, the end user had to be very explicit in what they intend to do. Like, I want to apply for a home loan. They can't say, I want to buy a house. If I've come to a bank and I say I want to buy a house, no intent would be identified. So user was expected to say that I want to apply for a home loan. But from there to the agentic era, how it has gone is, instead of explicit intent, understand the intention of the user or intent implicitly. Why would someone come to us and say that he wants to buy a house? So obviously he or she means that they want to apply for a home loan. right? So the goal of what is the objective with which the user has come has to be understood from the user input. And in the NLP era, when we were doing this explicit intent detection, we were praying that user doesn't type a long user input, right? So shorter the input, the better the intent detection. So that was the goal. But now we hope that user gives the precursor, what is the occasions. Someone can come and say, hey, my next month my daughter is getting married. On that occasion I want to gift her a house, and I'm looking for your help. So the bank has to understand that. And you could be very empathetic, saying, hey, congratulations on your daughter's wedding, we are happy to help you in applying for a home loan, right? So that's the kind of era that we are transitioning to. Cobus, would you agree with that?
I really love, Girish, what you said about, with chatbots, we prayed that the user is not too verbose. It doesn't say too much. And someone said with chatbots, you wanted people to be as short as possible, economic in words. And now with Gen AI, the more context a user gives, the better. And I was at a conference recently, and an executive from Google spoke, and he said there was a point in time, like a few years ago, where they saw that Google searches jumped from 2 to 5 words to more than 20 words, and that was like the ChatGPT moment where people realized, and actually ChatGPT taught them, you can be more verbose, and the more context you give, the better the response. And I also like what you said, Garish, about the intent just being a label, and classifying, what the user, um, what the user's intention is. Um, there was so much hype about intents I did, a short while ago, and I mean it's sobering when you said now it's actually just a classification. And I mean when you prompt, you also give context so that the language model can actually understand, what your intent is.
I think both of you have touched on something essential here: how context and historical interactions, or like past memory, play into understanding the intent. Now, I would like to double click on the memory aspect because it seems like such a critical component of making these systems work effectively. Now, how do you see context in terms of system memory and managing it short term and long term?
I think here too, the terminology has kept evolving over the era. And during our initial days of conversational AI platform, which was powered by the traditional NLP and then machine learning, deep learning, we used to have different types of memory wherein we used to store users' memory, what all the information about that particular user as a separate context. We would call it as user context. Then there is a session context, which is the current conversation session, what all was happening that was being maintained, including the state of conversation and what all user was asking within that, which intent is in currently, what are we talking to. Then there was also enterprise context, which was maintained across the entire organization. While we retain that, now the terminology has changed more in terms of episodic memory, procedural memory, and stuff, which is again basically leans on to the context management, what to retain, what not to retain. The important thing that I'm seeing is everyone is focused on how do I store memory, factual information, non-factual information, contextual, wherein the output of a tool to be stored temporarily until this episode finishes and then evicted. But it is also very important to understand how do I forget the memory uh, over the period of time, right? So all of us grew from a child, from our schooling to our graduation to work. uh, we don't remember many of the stuff that has happened in our life because our brain feels that's not important. So it is also the memory is limited, whatever is available. It's not just about limited memory, but also retrieval or recall of that becomes difficult if you keep accumulating a lot of memory. So you should also understand, have policies determined us to forget some of the memory.
Yeah, I just want to double click on what Girish said. And actually, I want to use some words Girish used in the previous conversation. A while back, Girish, you mentioned something that I found really interesting, where you spoke about, as you alluded now, that memory is stored somewhere, in some kind of data repository. And something you said was that memory informs context. And I really found that concept very interesting, Girish. Where you said the context of the conversation is really set by the memory that's retrieved. And the second thing I want to just double click on, which Girish said a while back, because Girish, you spoke about this triangle of different sources of context, and at the bottom you had the internet, and then you had organizational context, personal, session, and I really love the way you broke that down in terms of how that pyramid is built for context in any conversation, and how like Gen AI allows us to really have this advanced, context stack, if you like.
Yeah, so it's like, say, whenever now with powerful agents coming in, they know when to do a web search, when to search in your enterprise applications, get that data, generate an answer. But then that data that you have fetched is usually temporary. The user doesn't need that. You can edit that safely post this episode finishes. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Now let's keeping context as the keyword. Let's switch the context a bit towards search. And, uh, and it's interesting that enterprises, as they grow, they have a lot of data. They want to retrieve that information at the best way, in the best way possible, and at the fastest rate as possible as well. Now, when we think about how these AI solutions access and process information, much of it comes down to the search capabilities. And at the foundation of search, we often talk about chunking strategies. What lies beyond chunking? And what do you see as the natural progression?
See, I think chunking is a very old technology. It's been there for a long time. But then the idea, the reason why it got highlighted a lot in recent era is because of retrieval augmented generation, because of the context window size that enterprises have, and sorry, LLMs have, right? So the context window is very limited, and my enterprise knowledge is unlimited, right? Many large organizations have TBs of data which can't be directly fit in. So you want to search for only the relevant portions of the content and give only those relevant portions of the content to LLM so that answer can be generated. That's where I think chunking became very important. So and it has evolved a lot in the last couple of years, where we started with hard chunking of tokens from, say, every 500 tokens is one chunk, to overlapping, creating overlapping chunks from 1 to 500. Then second chunk would start from 450 to 750, so that there is some overlap or relationship being maintained between chunks, to hierarchical chunking, where you maintain this parent child kind of a relationship. So it has been evolving. However, there is no one hard and fast rule of what is the best chunking methodology, because the type of data also changes, right? You have structured content, you have unstructured content. If you take an example of Jira, while you call it as structured, it has each Jira could have sub children, like they could have comments, who was assigning relationship. So a lot of things change. Even for a Word document, while it is unstructured content, every Word document or a Google Doc will have a lot of history of who is this document shared with, who has edit access, who has write access, all that, right? So for structured content, the way you chunk should be different. For unstructured content, the way you chunk should be different. And within unstructured content, if there are images, tables, then the strategy of chunking should be different. So you have to choose the problem, and depending on the problem, you adapt your chunking strategy. So that's why in our search AI application, you can choose different strategies which are available depending on the source type that you select, and then you can adapt to the chunking strategy, right? So we need to understand the structure of the content, and depending on that, use chunking. The latest uh, chunking that we also use is something called as contextual chunking, where you not just take the literal chunk from token to token, but you prefix or suffix some of the context uh, to the existing content, so that the retrieval becomes better. So the basic idea is that vector retrieval should become more and more better. So for that, you do apply chunking strategy depending on the problem state.
Yeah, I like what Girish is saying, and while he was speaking, I was thinking to myself, when he said it will evolve into the future. I mean, if you really just think about it, the idea behind chunking is just having the most accurate context or for the language model to reference at each point of inference. And I like the way Girish has highlighted that it's very complex because you've got cost, you've got latency, especially for a conversational interface, um, and so it's not. You've got to consider all those different factors. But I think for the audience, the focus is really having the most and best and the most relevant contextual reference at each point of inference. And as Karish alluded, it's got to scale, right? So we've got many enterprise customers. Like it's easy to do something confined, but you really need to be able to scale it across, hundreds and thousands of users.
I agree. I think the two very valid points that are three actually, which you raised, Kubus. One is the cost. Token cost will be very high unless you are sending only the relevant chunks to them, right? That is one. Second is the latency that you mentioned. It is really, really higher the number of tokens. Yes, some of the LLMs can take a larger context window, but then the time that is taken if you send large data to them is also very high. So it depends on the problem statements. If you are building a voice application or a digital chat application, the latency is of very, very high importance. So you cannot afford to send a very large a context to them. And then, yeah, when enterprises, you have petabytes of data or terabytes of data, and then building a POC on using RAG is very, very easy, but taking it to production scale is something that is really important, right? So building a RAG application is just a 2 or 3 days job, but choosing the right platform or a framework for your enterprise, which is production grade for the amount of or the volume of data that you have, the volume of integrations that you need. Like you need to connect to multiple systems like Google Drive or OneDrive, SharePoint, Jira, Confluence, Wiki, whatever different systems that you have. And every employee should be able to get answers from all those systems from just one place. So that's the kind of problem statement that you we need to envision before we choose any platform.
Thank you for that. Now, let's take a step back to zoom out from the technical mechanics and look at the bigger picture. When we think about search itself and how users interact with information, where do you see search heading? In other words, talk to us about search and the future of search.
I think it's a tough one, but let me just maybe like again think of Karish's triangle in terms of search. I mean, like when you spoke previously, Girish, you had at the base of the triangle the internet. So I just saw today how many language models have introduced web retrieval APIs and web search APIs, and they've also introduced like deep research APIs, which one can orchestrate. So, if I think about that triangle Girish, spoke about, I think there are different levels of search depending on the context, and it feels like in the near future, there will be an AI layer between us and the internet. Um, retrieving that interfacing with websites. So it feels like there are more sources that's being, mined for information, and data. I mean, data is really, if you think of SharePoint, it always used to be like quite visual, and now it's optimized for search. And maybe a last thing before I hand over to Girish also is the whole notion of data being customized, Girish. Like, I mean, people don't just want the information anymore, which they search. They want to have it in the form of a white paper or in an essay, or just give me a paragraph or draw me a schematic diagram on that data. So that's just some loose thoughts, Girish, around search from my side.
Yeah, I agree with you. And slowly what I'm seeing is the search, the plain old RAG is being transformed to agentic RAG, and then the in search intelligence itself is becoming such a large area wherein you will start seeing autonomous search or research orchestration, where the AI will decide, depending on the user's query, it can automatically decide whether I should search from your personal information, previous discussions, or previous browsing history that you have done, which you can see from your latest Comet browser, and some of the stuff that are which are being released, right? It can adapt to your taste, it can adapt to your personalized browsing history, to search history, and automatically decide whether I should search in your personal data or your enterprise data, or should I do a web search. Is that information something that is required? It could also be doing some live data search, wherein you might be looking for some live football score or a live financial analysis on a stock. And if you are asking for such, you don't have to choose web. AI will automatically decide. You just speak the way you are asking your friend or your assistant. Your assistant or friend will decide from where this information should come and answer you. I think that's where I feel search is going.
If I can maybe just ask Akhil, if I can just ask Harish this question. I was actually today reading through the documentation of Anthropic, and their web search API, and actually Akhil and I were speaking about it just before we joined this call. The fact that the model, so the web search is a function within the Anthropic model, and the model decides when it invokes that search or not. Like, do I need to search the internet for Garish's uh, query, or can I find this information somewhere else? And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts, Garish, because there's this danger that we can collapse the OS of our agentic workflow into the model, right? And then there are companies like Nvidia that's saying, well, don't collapse it in the model. You must keep autonomy. You must build your own framework. So I would love to hear your views on that, because I mean, obviously, from a core perspective, we also advocate that keep as much granular control as possible.
Yeah, so core never advocates anything, but core is always flexible with all the possible customers, right? So there are some customers who are ready to give full autonomy to agents, right? But there are some customers who want it to be controlled because of the different controls they are guide, or the different policies they have to adhere to as per their country laws or their industry laws. And in that cases we say, yes, you use orchestrated thing, you have control with you. Core is flexible enough for both sides. So if you need control, we give all the controls, you choose how much autonomy you want to give. At the same time, if you want to give full autonomy, you could do that, but everything comes at a cost, right? So if AI is deciding, a human could also make mistakes. We are more forgiving as humans for a fellow humans to do mistakes, but we don't forgive if AI does the mistakes. But the mistakes of AI could also be very costly, right? Though, because suddenly when the bill comes at the month end for the number of tokens that it has consumed because of some random mistake, right? Then that's a huge problem. We are seeing in some cases, when some of our developers were doing the coding using AI tools, it deleted the entire database by mistake. Maybe it didn't understand the instruction of the developer properly, or it didn't warn before doing that and take a confirmation. So when you give autonomy to AI, it could do mistakes, but it could be a very irreparable damage. So you need to be cautious on what you're doing. But yes, I would love to be a bit forgiving as long as there is not much of a financial implication to it.
So this brings up an interesting distinction that our viewers would benefit from understanding better. We hear a lot about RAG, but now there's also this concept of agentic RAG. This brings me to my final question, and I promise this is the last. Can you help us understand the difference between RAG and agentic RAG?
Yeah, I keep reading a lot of articles saying RAG is dead, and I keep laughing at it because I mean it's some way or the other way it's still RAG. So, but the difference is that whenever someone says RAG is dead or what is RAG between agent RAG and agentic RAG, the plain RAG was more about search for your chunks, retrieve the chunks, whether you are using vector embeddings or hybrid search, whatever dimension, whichever embedding model, doesn't matter. But you were getting the your user was giving a query, you would just fire against your vector database, get the top k chunks, and then give it to an LLM with a predefined meta prompt and generate an answer. That's a traditional RAG that we would do. But with agentic RAG, the art of possibility has increased, right? So earlier, I mean, you would just ask a question and you would get an answer. But with agentic RAG, the possibilities, like I mentioned, you could ask a question which is something like a research oriented question, wherein if you say, hey, check my account and I want to apply for a bank loan of $2 million to buy a house somewhere, and I also want to buy a yacht which could be around 500K, um, and go through my credit ratings and see if I'm eligible for having these loans. It's a very big complex thing. Now this needs you to interact with the backend database, checking your credit rating, checking your payment history, doing search on what is the current price on each of these stuff. There are a lot of steps, right? But now with agentic AI, what possible is take this entire thing, break down into smaller tasks, prepare a proper plan, retrieve the information for each of these steps, reason on that responses, replan if required, and then act on those recommendations whatever are come, and then generate a final answer, right? So it's like now a proper research. Though you are just, I understood the objective of the user, you have responded, but this needs a lot of planning to be done, breaking down the problem, understanding what are the granular tasks to be completed before I prepare the final answer. So these are the things that are possible using agentic RAG. We are working with some large customers doing analysis on generation of investment reports, uh, doing quality audits on the agent conversations that have happened. So there are a lot of automations which could be done. Having said that, this will add latency, so we need to be very careful on when to use what. If you autonomy on planning and stuff, it's proportional to the latency that gets added. So uh, wherever latency is okay compared to the quality of the responses, uh, I would always prefer agentic AI.
Yeah, I think that was a very good breakdown, Girish, and I like the way you highlighted that complexity or the orchestration in the middle, where you can really ask nuanced and complex questions. And I love the way you explained how you need to, how Agentic RAG really fetches from different data sources and then synthesizes that information to give you the right answer. So that's actually a very good explanation.
Yeah, so just to add, like in our search AI product, and we were taking examples of an enterprise customer where you might have connected to your Google Drive, you might have connected to your Jira, you might have connected to your CRM systems like Salesforce or HubSpot, and you might have connected to your Gmail or chat, Zoom chat systems. Imagine a salesperson coming in and saying, "Hey, I have a meeting with XYZ Corp tomorrow. Can you prepare me for the meeting?" It's a very typical use case because sales people are so busy. They are hopping from one call to another call. They are traveling frequently. They don't have enough time to do the research. And the query is as simple. I mean, earlier example I took was very long, but here this simple: prepare me for the meeting for the XYZ car. Now, preparing for the meeting is, while it sounds simple, I need to go to the HubSpot and try to understand what is the deal size, who is my point of contact with whom I'm going to talk to, go to my Google Calendar, understand when is that meeting, who are the participants, go to Zoom chat, understand my previous meetings, meeting minutes, any action points, any Jira issues or FRs created, what is the status on each of them, any email conversations that I had with that person, what did I promise last time to come back with, any internal documents, sales internal artifacts that I might have stored on Google Drive or OneBox or SharePoint, go fetch the data from there, and then prepare a final draft of some bullet points which they can go through, and then be ready before going into the call. So uh, queries could be very simple, but the plan and the answers could be very difficult. So that's something that is challenging and possible with agentic RAG. Sorry.
And that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you so much, Girish and Kobus, for sharing your valuable insights. Uh, I personally learned a lot, and it was great to learn the difference between agentic RAG, in chunking, context, in all the other stuff that we spoke about. Once again, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks a lot, Akhil, for giving me this opportunity to be part of it. Hope that was useful to everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Akil.